And Astyages, the king, calls one of the servants over, and the servant brings a basket. And Astyages says, "Look at what you've been eating." Opens the basket, and it's the head of his son inside.
Test the claim.
Conversation.
This is the most peaceful discussion of speakers' comments.
Yeah. So what was the question? The question that you asked me
About the
Cyrus's.
was it his grandfather or something?
Right.
Because I was watching some YouTube.
Right. So
videos on it.
yeah, I mean, there are limited sources. The two most famous, well-known sources for, in terms of biography of Cyrus the Great, are Xenophon, in his biography called the Chiropedia or Cyropedia, and he lived, let's say, 100 years or so after the life of Cyrus, and then probably the best known one being that the histories of Herodotus, who's considered the grandfather of history.
Yes.
So he's like the most well-known and earliest recorder of histories. However, again, not a contemporary of Cyrus, admittedly. His reliability is brought into question, and he's accused of fabricating a lot of his quite outlandish claims, not just about the life of Cyrus, but in other matters as well. But I'll give you a brief rundown of what he says about how Cyrus came into the world in his early years, especially as they pertain to his grandfather. So his grandfather is said to have been Astyages, the king of the Medes. So the Medes are an Iranian, a historical Iranian group distinct from the Persians. And they were the most powerful Iranian kingdom before the Persians.
Okay.
So Astyages was famous for being part of a three-party alliance between the Medes, Babylon, who were ruled by Nabonidus, and Lydia, who were ruled by Croesus. And together they defeated the Assyrians, the same Assyrians who took the Hebrews captive and destroyed the first temple.
I remember that.
So Herodotus describes Astyages, the king of the Medes, as having had a vision. And he was quite fond of having his visions and dreams interpreted by his priests. So in one dream, he had two significant dreams. I don't know which way around they are, but one of them was that he dreamt that from his daughter, Mandana, came a vine from her loins. And it became so huge that it blocked out the sky above his realm. So these priests interpreted this to mean that she was a threat to his rule.
Okay.
So he committed to having her married off to the king, to the ruler of a benign kingdom down south somewhere, where she would pose no threat. So she had him married off to Cambyses, the king of Persia, which at that time was a small province with no great power south of in the southern part of the Median kingdom. So she went off, got married, and sometime later came back with news that she was pregnant. Her father Astyages had another dream, and this time a flood came from her loins and flooded his kingdom entirely. So a similar theme to the first one.
Yeah.
His priests interpreted this to mean that now that they had news that she was pregnant, it was her offspring that was the threat, not her. She wasn't the threat herself. So Astyages ordered one of his kinsmen in his court to take the baby when it was born and have it taken out to the wilderness and have it exposed to the wild animals to be killed, and therefore extinguishing the threat to his kingdom, which seems like a crazy thing to do. But this seemed to be how things were done in those days, how hegemony was decided. So the name of this court of this kinsman was Harpagus, who later became a very famous general in history. So Harpagus took the baby, but he had a crisis of conscience and he couldn't bring himself to do it. So he took the baby to a local herdsman by the name of Mithridates, and he gave the baby to Mithridates and said, "You take the child and have it exposed." Now, unbeknownst to Harpagus, Mithridates' wife had just had a stillborn child, and he saw this as a gift from God. So he said, "I have a stillborn child, and I have this child that's come from nowhere from this guy Harpagus, and he's asking me to kill him. How can I kill a child when I've just had one stillborn?" So he swapped the babies, gave the dead child back to Harpagus when he came back, and kept this royal child as something precious and committed to raising it with his wife from that day forth. Harpagus was none the wiser. He handed a baby over and he received a dead one back. He had done his job as far as he was concerned. He took the baby back to the palace and they gave it a royal funerary rites. So fast forward a few years, there are a group of boys in the village, and this young farmer's boy is chosen to be the king of the game of soldiers and kings. He orders the boys to march, and the other boys were his soldiers. One of those boys was a nobleman's son, and he wasn't prepared to take orders from the son of a herdsman, the son of a farmer. So he said, "No, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. You're not going to be my king. I'm the son of a nobleman. I'll be the king." So this farmer's son had the other boys beat him as a punishment for his insubordination. This nobleman's son ran back to the palace, complained to his father, and his father had the ear of the king, who ordered that this boy, this common boy, and his father come to court to answer the charge. Unbeknownst to everybody, this boy who had been chosen to be the king of the game was the young prince who had been supposedly killed when he was a baby. So the boy and his father, Mithridates, the herdsman, go to court to answer the charge. Mithridates is absolutely trembling with fear. And the courtiers begin to ask questions of Mithridates and the boy. And Astyages is listening in on the conversation, on the interrogation, and he begins to notice that there are differences, stark differences between the boy and his father. The father, maybe in stature, in build, in confidence, he's just not the same as this young man who's very self-assured, very confident, speaks like someone above his station. So he pulls them aside. He pulls the herdsman Mithridates aside and says, "Tell me who this boy is, because he's not your son." Mithridates completely capitulates, tells the whole story. In the middle of the night, one night, Harpagus from your court brought a baby to me and told me to have it exposed to the wild animals and return it dead. My wife had just had a stillborn child. I gave him the stillborn child and kept this boy and raised him as my own. So Astyages, putting so much faith in his priestly interpreters of visions and dreams, turns to his priests once again and says, "What does this mean? What should I do?" And the priests say, "King Astyages, this is a cause for celebration. Your grandson has disappeared for a number of
But
years."
didn't I hear that, I don't know, maybe it's a different story, but they killed one of the babies and they thought there was like a meal or something.
I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay, fine. I wasn't sure if it was
I'm getting to that, but it's good that you know some of the story.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was
So I'll connect the dots for
Yeah,
you.
because I wasn't sure what that is.
So Astyages, upon the advice of his advisors, holds punishment and says, "This is a cause for celebration. Let's have a banquet." Harpagus is there. This is the guy who was charged with taking the baby and having it killed. He said, Harpagus had now risen in the ranks. Harpagus, you are also invited to the banquet, but ask your son to come and assist with the preparations first. So Harpagus sends his son to assist with the preparations, and then at the time of the banquet, Harpagus attends. The young, who turns out to be Syrus, attends. His mother, his father, all reunited. Mithridates, his wife, they're all there to celebrate. And the celebration goes on, the banquet goes on, everybody eats their fill, but Harpagus notices that he's getting dishes that no one else is eating. And his mind starts working. And suddenly the king, Astyages, stops proceedings and calls to Harpagus and says, Harpagus, are you enjoying your food? And Harpagus says, this is the greatest meal I've ever had in my life. I'm honored to have been invited and to have been treated with such hospitality. And the king says, do you know what you're eating? And Harpagus says, I don't know, but this is the food of the gods, whatever it might have been. And Astyages, the king, calls one of the servants over, and the servant brings a basket. And Astyages says, look at what you've been eating. Opens the basket, and it's the head of his son inside. So Astyages has arranged for Harpagus' son to be fed to Harpagus as punishment for failing to have followed through in the order to have Cyrus killed when he was a baby.
Yes.
Absolutely crazy. Now, whether or not this is true, only Herodotus knows.
Yeah.
Now, Harpagus took his punishment on the chin. He didn't break down, he didn't wail, he didn't revolt. He accepted his punishment. And this struck a chord with the king. He said, wow, this guy has accepted his punishment. This is someone I can trust. He failed me then, but he'll never fail me again. Now, over the subsequent years, Cyrus returns to Persia, or goes to Persia with his real parents, his biological parents, and learns the art of kingship. He will become the king of Persia eventually. And eventually he does. He succeeds his father, Cambyses, and becomes the king of Persia, Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great. Now, over the years, Harpagus keeps in contact with Cyrus. And notably, what he did was he would send notes inside the pelts of rabbits because he suspected that their communications were being monitored. So he would put notes inside the pelts of rabbits, according to Herodotus. And in those communications, he attempted to build an alliance with Cyrus to such an extent that Harpagus would raise an army to face the Persians. The Persians would bring their army, and Harpagus assured Cyrus that when their armies met on the battlefield, Harpagus' men would lay down their weapons, turn and join his forces, and then they would return back to Ekbatana, was the name of the Median capital, which is in modern-day Hamadan in Iran. So only a small number of Harpagus or the Median men resisted the call to join the Persians. They were either killed or ran away. So the Median and the Persian armies joined and went and conquered Cyrus's grandfather's kingdom. Harpagus' intention was to kill the grandfather for what he had done to his son. However, Cyrus, in a demonstration of his tolerance, he is said to have retired his grandfather, maybe even have taken him as an advisor, but there's no way to really corroborate that. But it speaks to his humanity. So from there, Harpagus and Cyrus in alliance, in a formidable alliance, one of the greatest in history. Harpagus is also famous for developing the strategy of groundworks, so building things to use as siege weapons when laying siege to a city, for example. Those armaments that are constructed at the scene of a siege, were first developed by Harpagus. So from there, they conquered Lydia, ruled by Croesus, and then eventually, in 539 BC, they walked into Babylon and conquered Babylon almost without a battle. And part of the strategy was redirecting the course of the Euphrates River, and therefore cutting off the water supply to the city, which basically meant that the gates were opened and they walked in without a fight. And that is the birthday of the Persian Empire, so to speak.
So Darius came afterwards?
That's a much more complicated story, but yes, there was one, arguably two kings between Cyrus and Darius.
So do you know the story of like the Book of Esther and whatnot.
I'm vaguely familiar with it.
But is there like any reports like that in
In Herodotus?
or something? Because it had to be like a Jewish, someone that became the wife of a king, like, and how the minister
Right.
was killed.
Haman.
And so
Uh-huh.
I would assume that story had to be renowned and remembered. I would.
Yeah,
just,
I can't attest to any Persian sources. However, my understanding is that there is a difference of opinion between whether Esther married Artaxerxes, or if she was a concubine, or if she
Yes.
married him at all. Because
He
she
wasn't
was
Jewish, but it wasn't an issue as well. Yeah, I mean that's a different issue as well. But yeah.
yeah. So my understanding is that she kept her Jewishness
Yeah.
quiet, and it wasn't until she was able to expose the plot by Haman to liquidate the Jews in
Liquidate
Persia.
like a
Yeah, I
stock.
mean, massacre
Yeah, I know what you mean.
and take their riches,
Yeah.
basically. So what I've heard is that Haman's motivation for this was that he believed that Jewish.
He was an Amalek. He was an Amalekite.
Who was?
Haman.
Okay,
He was from the tribe of
I don't know.
Amalek.
I don't know.
Those are the tribes that were in the wilderness of the desert.
I see.
They were the ones that decided to attack the Jewish people.
So not a Persian, you're saying?
No, I mean it's because we believe that he was an Amalek.
I see.
So he was from the tribe there.
I got you.
Yeah,
Amalekites.
and that's one that the King Saul is told to kill and whatnot.
I got you.
So we believe that he came from that
Right.
group of people, that tribe.
So my understanding is
Not the
that
king, but Haman.
I understand. My understanding is that his motivation was that he came upon I don't want to say plot, but I think that's probably the best way to frame it. Jewish elites were fueling Persian expansionist ambitions
It's like what's happening now.
to such an extent
Yeah.
that they feared that this expansion may bankrupt the empire. And I suppose Haman inferred that it was intentionally to bankrupt the Persian Empire. However, the relationship that seems to have sprung up between Artaxerxes and Esther appears to have, cut. The more we talk about it, the more I'm remembering some of the plot twists. He asked, you know better than me. He asked Haman what would best befit someone who was an advisor, a trusted advisor to the king. The king asked him, and he said he advised the king to reward him, but he didn't. He thought the king was talking about him and not about Mordecai.
Yes.
Because Mordecai had brought to his attention
That's the plot.
the uncle of Mordecai had brought to the king's attention this plot against him, and so the king was asking, how should I reward Mordecai? But Haman thought he was talking about himself.
Yes.
And the rest is history or mythology.
Because I just thought that it would be like recorded in.
We're talking about Esther, the book of Esther.
I just thought it would be like recorded in.
As far as I don't
I
know
would
of any.
just assume so, like I said before.
Well, this is why, had it been, I would say it's more likely to have been a historical event.
Also, it would refute the Muslim that Haman was an Egyptian.
Right. As far as I know, the only source we have for this story is the biblical one.
Yes.
But I'll do more research.
Yeah, I just. But Darius was the son of Esther, or not?
No. Darius came before that. I mean, there were various Dariuses. Sorry.
Yes, but he had. I remember the Talmud speaks about the son of Esther.
I see.
I can look right now, and they might be, maybe even after.
So I'll just give you a brief rundown of the lineage. So Cyrus passed power on to his son Cambyses, who was Cambyses II, named after Cyrus's own father, Cambyses I. And then there is some dispute about who took power after Cambyses' mysterious death on the way back from Egypt, because Cambyses fulfilled his father's ambitions of conquering Egypt and became the pharaoh of the 26th dynasty of Egypt. And as far as I'm aware, that's the first non-African rulers of Egypt up until that point, although there were subsequent ones like the Ptolemies. So after Cambyses, it was either his brother Bardia or a usurper to the throne by the name of Gaumata, and there's a fascinating story behind that.
This one.
The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah 3b, which
Obviously I'm not an expert, but that's why.
It talks about when to start counting the king's reign, the counting of a king's reign. Writes that Koresh, Cyrus, he was a kosher king. Daryavesh, which is Darius, his actual name was Darayavaush. That's right. And Artaxerxes. How do you say that? Artaxerxes.
I don't know.
Artaxerxes.
Basically, this is this part.
Name of his kingdom are one in the same. Oh, I see. So, yes, I've heard about this.
Yeah.
In the biblical narrative, I call it a mistake, but Cyrus and Darius are used interchangeably. So there are instances where the name Darius is used, but we're supposed to read it as the same as Koresh.
I'm not aware of such instances of
What was it? Was the second part important? I didn't read the second
this
part.
is just like a midrash.
Okay. Well, anyway, I hope I answered some of your questions about Astyages.
But is any good stuff I can read? Because I've been very looking to learn more about this stuff.
Cyropedia by Xenophon, the histories of Herodotus. Those are the starting points. So the Cyropedia.
I think you have my number as well.
I might have.
So you can always just.
The Cyropedia of Xenophon is an incredibly important work of biography, to such an extent that, for example, amongst the founding fathers of the United States, Thomas Jefferson is said to have had at least 2 copies of it that were found annotated. So what he did was he appears to have drawn upon some of the principles of statesmanship displayed by Cyrus the Great, and then incorporated them into his own approach and into building his role in building the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. Yeah, I mean,
I'm surrounded.
Thank you very much for answering my
We're going
questions.
to force you to borrow money.
No worries.
Thank you very much.
You're going to borrow money from us.
Well, we can talk about the foundation of the first credit-based banking system
Oh, you're recording it.
in Babylon.
This is yours, yeah?
Instigated by under the rule of Darius I. We still have the names of the first
Sorry, start what's
Jewish.
the sentence?
We can talk about the establishment of the earliest credit-based banking system, established in Babylon under the rule of Darius I. And in fact, we still have the names of the families that ran those banks.
What year is this?
No worries, man. Towards the end of the 6th century BC.
6th century BC, but you have 6th century BC.
So 2,600 years ago, but we still have the names of the families that ran those banks.
And if you Google or ChatGPT or whatever, if you Google when was the first banks, what would it say?
The first banks were the first storages of wealth.
Yeah, I mean,
But I'm saying credit-based banking, where you could borrow money based on your reputation, based on an assessment of your likelihood to pay it back, not just put your money here, take it out when you want it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so borrowing. Okay.
Aha.
So what? Banks were storage places before. I'm not going on camera. Banks.
You're on camera, mate.
Hello, camera. I'm exhausted.
Where have you just come from? Don't worry, I'll wrap it up.
Yeah. No, where have I come from? No, I've been here for a while.